The storm had raged for nearly a week, burying the world beneath thick, endless snow. In the San Juan Mountains of Colorado Territory, December 1874, the wind screamed over the ridges like the mourning of lost souls, and the land lay silent beneath its icy shroud. Nothing moved except the swirling flakes. Nothing spoke except the wind. Death here came not with violence, but with quiet, a cold that stilled the heart without a sound. Caleb Morgan pushed through the drifts, each step a battle against the thigh-deep snow that clung to him like chains. A gold miner by trade, solitude was his companion ever since a winter storm had claimed his wife 3 years past. He no longer sought answers from heaven or earth. The mountain silence was all he needed. But that morning, a sound shattered the quiet. Faint, thin, a cry that didn't belong to the storm or the beasts of the wild. A human cry, a baby's wail, fragile, desperate, and real. He froze, listening. The sound echoed from the hollow below, carried by the wind. Caleb turned, scanning the slope, and without hesitation began to descend, boots crunching ice, heart pounding with the unfamiliar urgency of life, calling out from death's doorstep. At the base of a craggy bluff, he spotted it, a small shape, wrapped in tattered cloth, half buried in snow, crimson stains marking where life had fought and bled. Dropping to his knees, Caleb brushed the snow away. A baby, alive but weakening, its cries now soft whimpers. Beside it lay a woman, barely clinging to breath, her face pale as the drifts, her lips blue, hands wrapped around the child with the last of her strength. Caleb didn't stop to think. He shed his heavy coat, wrapping it around mother and child, and pressed them close to his chest, sharing what warmth he could. With practiced hands, he struck flint to tinder, coaxing a tiny flame from the dry moss and pine needles he always carried. He shielded the fire with his body, feeding it carefully, as if the flame's life was tied to theirs. As the fire grew, he wiped the snow from the woman's brow, his gloved fingers gentle. He removed one glove, placed his bare hand on her cheek, so cold, too cold, and began to rub, slow and firm, trying to bring life back into her stillness. The baby stirred weakly, mouth seeking what it could not find. Caleb poured a trickle of warm water from his canteen into a tin cup, touched it to the infant's lips, and watched as she licked at it, a small, hopeful sign. The night passed in silence, but for the crackling fire and the storm sigh. When the first pale light of morning touched the peaks, the woman's fingers twitched. A shudder ran through her. Her eyelids lifted, heavy and slow, revealing eyes dark with fear and confusion. Her lips moved without sound. Caleb leaned closer, his voice rough and quiet. "You're safe," he said. "The baby's alive." A tear welled in her eye, froze on her cheek before it could fall. Caleb added wood to the fire, tucked the coat tighter around them, and kept watch, as if daring the cold to try again. As the day brightened, she stirred more. Her gaze drifted to the child, and a cracked whisper escaped her throat. "Evelyn." Caleb nodded. No questions, not now. He fed the baby a mix of goat's milk and water, cradled her close, watched her color improve. Evelyn's eyes shone with tears that were not from pain. "You saved her," she said, voice barely a breath. Caleb didn't answer, just tended the fire, checked the blankets, kept them alive. When she winced, he mixed herbs and warm water, cleaned her wound with careful, steady hands. "Might sting," he warned gently. She flinched but let him work. When it was done, he sat back, silent again, and the wind rattled a scrap of tin and bone hanging from a branch, a charm to scare off animals. Evelyn jumped at the sound, clutching the baby tight, eyes wide with dread. "It's only the wind," Caleb said, but she didn't relax. He saw the truth. It wasn't the storm she feared. Something else haunted her. He didn't press. Not yet. By the second day, she could take a few steps with his help, but they couldn't stay. Supplies were thin, and the hollow offered no shelter from the cold that still hung heavy as grief. Caleb lifted her, secured her with rope beneath his wool cloak, tucked the baby inside his shirt, and set out toward the mining camp 7 miles off, Silver Hollow. He spoke little on that long, cold march. Evelyn's only words were a soft, pained, "You don't have to do this." His answer was a grunt and a steadier grip. When they reached the camp near dusk, the place came alive at their approach. Men stepped from cabins, women peeked through curtains. Whisper spread, curious, wary, judgmental. Caleb paid no mind. He went straight to the widow who ran the cookhouse, known for her kindness as much as her biscuits. One knock, and the door opened. The widow took in the sight of the half-frozen woman, the infant, and the snow-dusted miner. Caleb spoke plain. Got any cloth and milk? The storm had buried the mountains in white for what felt like forever. The wind had howled for days, sweeping over the peaks of the San Juans, erasing every sound except its own. Trees, rocks, even time itself vanished beneath the endless snow. Death here didn't come with a roar. It came quietly, in the stillness of cold that crept into bones and stopped hearts without a word. Caleb Morgan pushed forward, fighting the drifts with each weary step. A miner by trade, a solitary soul by choice, he had long since stopped looking for answers in the sky or among men. The storm had taken his wife 3 winters back, and since then, the mountain silence was the only voice he trusted. But that morning, through the endless hush, something else reached him, a sound too fragile for the storm to swallow. A child's cry, thin and desperate, lost in the wind. He froze, listening. The wail came again, carried from below. Without a second thought, Caleb turned toward the hollow, working his way down the slope, boots breaking ice with each step. At the base of the ridge, half hidden by snow, lay a bundle, a ragged blanket stained dark with blood. A baby's face peeked out, lips quivering, the tiny body trembling. Beside her, a woman lay motionless, skin pale as the snow, hands locked around the child in one last act of protection. Caleb dropped to his knees. No hesitation. He pulled off his coat, wrapped them both, and drew them close, trying to share what little warmth he had left. He struck flint to dry moss, coaxed a flame to life, fed it with pine needles and twigs, and shielded it from the wind. His breath rose in clouds as he rubbed the woman's frozen fingers, as he checked the baby's breath, as he whispered wordless promises to the cold night that he wouldn't let them die. The hours crawled by. When dawn finally touched the peaks, the woman's eyelids fluttered. A tremor ran through her. Her eyes, dark and wide with confusion, found his. "You're safe," Caleb said, his voice low and rough in the cold and silence. "The baby's alive." A single tear welled in her eye and froze against her cheek. Caleb added wood to the fire, tightened his coat around them, and kept vigil. She finally whispered her name, Evelyn. He asked for nothing more. He fed the child a mixture of warm water and milk from his flask, watched the color return to her cheeks. Evelyn watched too, tears falling freely now, not from pain, but from something deeper. "You saved her," she said. Caleb didn't answer. He only kept the fire alive, kept him alive. When Evelyn winced, he cleaned and dressed her wound with herbs and warm water, hand steady, voice gentle. "It'll sting," he warned. She bore it in silence. The wind rattled a string of tin and bone hanging from a tree, and Evelyn flinched, clutching the baby tight, terror in her eyes. Caleb said softly, "Just the wind." But he saw it. What she feared wasn't the storm. By the second day, Evelyn could stand with his help, but they couldn't stay. Caleb lifted her onto his back, wrapped her in his cloak, tucked the baby inside his shirt, and set out for Silver Hollow. The camp was no more than a scatter of cabins and tents, huddled around a frozen creek. Faces appeared at windows. Doors opened, whispers spread. Caleb ignored them. He went from door to door, asking for cloth, milk, wood. Some gave, some didn't. He thanked those who did, moved on from those who didn't. By nightfall, he'd found an abandoned shack near the supply depot. It wasn't much, but it kept out the wind. He built a fire, settled Evelyn and the baby near it, wrapped them in what he'd gathered. And then the knock came. 3 men stood outside. One held a lantern. The leader, Gage, the man who called the shots in Silver Hollow, had a gun on his hip and questions in his eyes. "You bringing strangers here, Morgan?" "They're with me," Caleb said simply. Gage stepped closer, peered inside. "That baby's not white. That woman's running from something. She's a mother. That's all anyone needs to know," Caleb answered. The crowd that had gathered murmured. Gage crossed his arms. "No charity here, Morgan. We got rules." She's not asking for charity. I am. Caleb's voice was calm, steady. When the murmurs grew, he added four quiet words that stilled them. If she goes, I go. Silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. Gage studied him, then spat into the snow. You're stubborn, Morgan. Fine, but if trouble comes, it's on you. When the door closed, Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. You shouldn't have done that. Already did, Caleb said, feeding the fire. That night, while the town slept, the fire came. Caleb woke to smoke, to heat, to the crackle of flames. Someone had soaked the shack in pitch. He grabbed Evelyn with one arm, the baby with the other, and kicked open the door. The shack groaned behind them, collapsing into fire. Without waiting to see if help would come, Caleb ran, through the snow, through the dark, until they reached a crack in the rock he knew, a place he'd once used to ride out a storm. Inside the cave, Caleb built a fire. Only then did Evelyn speak. Her story came in pieces. A preacher husband who wasn't what he seemed, a girl forced into marriage, locked away when she became pregnant, a baby he meant to steal. She had fled into the night, into the storm, with nothing but a blanket and a prayer. I named her Hope, she said, looking down at the sleeping child. Born in the dark, but I still believe there's light somewhere. She's more than hope, Caleb said softly. She's proof that good can survive even the worst winter. For 3 days they stayed hidden, the storm easing at last. Caleb hunted, gathered wood, checked for tracks. By the stream, as he washed the baby's blanket, he found it. A small gold locket tangled in the fabric, engraved with the name that haunted Evelyn's past. When he showed it to her, she reached out, then drew back, as if the thing burned. I thought it was lost, she whispered. Caleb said nothing, only watched as the firelight glimmered in her eyes, and the snow fell gentle and silent outside their hidden refuge. The storm had smothered the mountains for days, the world drowned in white, and the wind keened to the pines like a lament. The San Juans lay silent beneath the crushing weight of snow, and in that hush, death crept without sound or violence, settling like a shadow that needed no invitation. Caleb Morgan trudged through the drifts, his legs aching with each step. He was a miner, hardened by solitude and sorrow. His wife had been claimed by a blizzard years ago, and since then he trusted neither God nor man, only the cold certainty of the mountain's quiet. But on this morning that quiet broke. A thin, fragile sound, too soft to be wind, too human to be mistaken, rose from below. A baby's cry, faint, lost in the storm, but unmistakable. Without pause, Caleb veered toward the sound, boots cracking through the ice as he slid and scrambled down the slope. There at the base of a ridge lay a ragged bundle, half buried in snow, stained dark with blood. The baby's face peeked out, trembling. Beside her, a woman's body lay still, her hands clenched around the child, as if defying the storm with the last of her strength. Caleb knelt, pulling off his coat to wrap them both, tucking them close to his chest. He worked fast, striking flint to tinder, coaxing a flame from moss and needles, feeding it until it grew steady. His breath came in clouds as he rubbed warmth back into frozen fingers, checked the baby's breath, and kept the fire between them alive as the storm howled on. By dawn, the woman stirred, her eyes barely opening, dark with fear and confusion. You're safe? Caleb said, his voice low and rough. The baby's alive. A tear froze against her cheek. Caleb added wood to the fire, tightened his coat around them, and said no more. Later, when she could speak, she whispered, Evelyn. He nodded, asked nothing else. The baby fed from the milk he carried, her color returning. Evelyn watched, tears falling not from pain, but from a deeper ache. You kept her alive. Caleb only tended the fire, kept them warm, kept them breathing. When Evelyn flinched from the sting of the herbs he used on her wounds, he worked gently. It'll hurt some, he warned softly. And when she tensed at a clatter from the wind chime he'd strung up to scare off animals, he said, It's just the wind, though he saw the terror in her eyes. He knew then she wasn't just fleeing the storm. By the second morning, Caleb knew they had to move. He carried Evelyn on his back, the baby tucked inside his shirt, and set off for Silver Hollow, a rough camp of miners and tents. Faces watched as they arrived, whispers spread, but Caleb ignored them. He asked for what they needed: milk, cloth, firewood. Some gave, some turned away. That night, in a shack barely holding out the cold, 3 men came knocking. One was Gage, the man who ran the camp, his revolver heavy on his hip. "You bringin' trouble here, Morgan?" he asked. "They're with me," Caleb said. "She one of them runaways? That kid don't look white." "She's a mother," Caleb said, flat as stone. "That's all that matters." Gage scowled. "We don't do charity." "She's not asking." "I am." And when the murmurs grew, Caleb added, "If she goes, I go." The air held still. Gage studied him, spat into the snow. "You're stubborn. Fine. But if this brings trouble, it's on you." The trouble came in the night. Caleb woke to smoke. Sharp, thick, wrong. Someone had set the shack ablaze. Flames tore at the walls. He grabbed Evelyn, the baby, and ran. The fire roared behind them as they fled into the woods. They didn't stop until they found a crack in the rocks, a place Caleb knew. He built a fire, warmed them as best he could. And there, in the flickering light, Evelyn's story spilled out. She spoke of a preacher who'd taken her as a child bride, of a first wife who'd vanished, of fear dressed in scripture. The baby, she said, was the proof of the shame he'd tried to hide. Caleb listened, silent, jaw clenched tight. When she finished, he slammed his fist against the cave wall until his knuckles bled. Then he took the baby, held her close. "She's not going anywhere, not without a fight." Together they buried the past. Literally, they climbed to an old tree, dug a hole, and dropped the gold locket that tied Evelyn to that man into the earth. No words, just breath. Then they covered it, snow, dirt, pine needles. Done. Spring's thaw came slow. Caleb rebuilt the shack with his own hands. They kept to the edges of camp, quiet, watchful. And then he came, the preacher, rode in on a fine horse, dressed like he owned the world, called himself Reverend Abram W. Malister, claimed he'd come to fetch his sick, confused wife home, showed her picture, spun his tale. Caleb and Evelyn watched from their cabin. She froze at the sight of him. "He found us," she whispered. Caleb stood beside her, solid as the mountain. The preacher moved through camp, asking, praying, showing his papers. Gage came to Caleb's door. "He's got law on his side," Gage warned. "Folks are starting to listen." "She stays," Caleb said, hand resting near his gun. And when they met in the square, the preacher smiled, full of holy lies, called Evelyn mad, called the baby a mistake. But the crowd wasn't all convinced. An old woman remembered the first wife who'd vanished. Caleb stepped forward, his coat open to show the revolver at his hip. "She's not leaving, and that child's not yours to claim." The camp held its breath. The preacher's mask cracked. Gage cleared his throat. "Enough for one night. No one's leaving unless they choose it." The preacher left days later, empty-handed. The camp split. Some believed him. Others saw the truth in Evelyn's quiet strength. And each day she stepped out, held hope to the light, and faced the world. Bit by bit, trust returned. And Caleb? He watched her, and knew that whatever winter lay ahead, they'd face it together. The storm had battered the high country for days, swallowing the land in white silence, the wind crying to the pines like a warning. The peaks of the San Juan stood buried under heavy snow, and death here came not with fury, but with stillness. Caleb Morgan trudged through the drifts, weary and alone, a miner by trade, a man hardened by loss. Years back, the winter had taken his wife, and since then, Caleb had spoken little to God and nothing at all to men. The mountain offered no answers, only quiet, and Caleb had learned to live with it. But this day the quiet broke. A sound, thin, sharp, threaded through the storm. Not wind, not wolf. A baby's cry, faint, desperate, carried on the wind. Caleb froze, listening. Then, without hesitation, he turned toward it, boots cracking the ice as he made his way down the slope. There, in a hollow near the rocks, he found them. A woman, her body limp, her arms wrapped around a tiny bundle. The baby whimpered weakly, its breath a thread in the cold air. The woman's lips were blue, her skin pale as the snow beneath her. Caleb knelt, shrugging off his coat and wrapping it around them both. He struck flint, coaxing a flame to life, feeding it carefully until it flickered and caught. He rubbed warmth into frozen fingers, checked the baby's breath, watched over them as the storm raged on. By dawn, the woman stirred, her eyes open, dark with fear and confusion. "You're safe?" Caleb said, his voice low and steady. The child alive. Tears welled in her eyes, but froze before they could fall. Caleb added wood to the fire, tightened his coat around them, and waited for morning to come. Later, when her strength allowed, she whispered her name. Evelyn. No more. Caleb didn't press. The baby took milk from his tin cup, her color returning little by little. Evelyn watched, her heart breaking with relief. When the storm eased, Caleb carried them both to Silver Hollow, a rough camp of tents and cabins. The miners watched as he passed, curiosity and suspicion on their faces. Caleb asked for what they needed: milk, cloth, wood. Some gave, others didn't. He asked for no explanations. That night, in a borrowed shack, trouble found them. Flames rose around the walls, the fire no accident. Caleb pulled Evelyn and the baby into the snow and fled into the woods. They ran until they found a hollow in the rocks, a cave where Caleb had once waited out a blizzard. There, with firelight flickering on stone, Evelyn's story spilled out. She spoke of a preacher who had taken her as a girl, forced her into marriage, of a first wife who had vanished, of fear masked as scripture, and the night she fled with nothing but the baby and a scrap of hope. Caleb listened, silent, his jaw clenched tight. Then he took the baby into his arms. "She's safe now," he said, "and so are you." Together, they buried the past. On a cold ridge beneath an ancient tree, they laid the locket that tied Evelyn to that man beneath the snow. No words, just the sound of breath and the crackle of the fire that night. In time, they built a new life at the edge of the camp. A sturdy shack, a quiet peace. But peace is fragile. The preacher came, riding into camp on a fine horse, dressed like the world owed him its ear. He spoke of a lost wife, of madness and duty, showed her picture, spoke of saving her. Caleb stood firm. "She stays," he said. And when the preacher's mask slipped and the crowd murmured, Caleb made it plain. "She's not leaving, and that child is not yours." The preacher left empty-handed. The camp watched. Some believed the preacher's smooth words. Others saw the truth in the quiet strength of Evelyn's gaze. Caleb sold his tools and gold dust, bought a cart, a mule, and enough supplies to leave the camp behind. That night, as the storm gathered, they sat by the fire. Caleb looked at Evelyn and said, "I thought burying my wife was the hardest thing I'd ever do. But this, standing beside you, watching you fight for her, that's harder." He pulled a leather cord from his coat, simple and unadorned. "If you'll have me, I'll walk beside you. Not ahead, not behind, just beside, for as long as you'll let me." She took the cord, tied it around her wrist. No priest, no vows, just the firelight and the promise. A year passed. The snow returned, gentler this time. In a small cabin by the river, smoke rose from the chimney. Inside, Hope toddled across the floor. Evelyn stirred the stew, and Caleb brought in firewood. Their wedding had been beneath the sky, with no witnesses but the stars. Their promises whispered, not spoken loud, but true. Caleb burned his old gold claim that night, fed it to the fire. "I searched for gold in the earth," he wrote in the journal beside Evelyn's, "but I found it in the snow, in them." News came, carried by a passing rider. The preacher had been stripped of his title, vanished from sight. Caleb burned the letter too. When Evelyn asked, he simply said, "He's not coming." That night, they sat together, hope asleep between them. Outside, the mountain stood watch. Inside, the warmth of chosen family glowed. No more running, no more fear, just a quiet of peace hard-won and the star of something lasting. Caleb had sought treasure in the earth, but the true gold lay in the firelight, in Evelyn's eyes, in the soft breath of their daughter. And at last he was home,